October that we get finished, so fasten your seat belts, we'll get going. Anyway, we'll call the meeting to order, and the purpose of the meeting today is a budget workshop. Don't believe there'll be any action taken, maybe some motions and directions, but this starts the process, and we're looking forward to it. We see how we can best spend the taxpayers' folks and still deliver the highest quality of services we can. So, Mr. Manager, do you have any opening comments?
May I call the roll real quick?
Oh, yes, you may call the roll.
Just real quickly.
Please do. We want to be official. We got the fire chief and the police chief here. They'll either hit us with a water hose or tell us to call the roll. Make sure we're legal.
Okay. Mayor Joe McComb.
Here.
Council members Roland Barrera is not here yet. Rudy Garza?
Here he comes.
Oh, there he is. Okay. Roland Barrera is here. Rudy Garza?
Here.
Paulette Guajardo? Present. Gil Hernandez?
Here.
Michael Hunter?
Here.
Ben Molina?
Present.
Everett Roy?
Present.
Greg Smith?
Here.
Interim City Manager Keith Selman?
Here.
City Attorney Miles Risley?
Here.
Mayor and Council, a quorum of the council and the required charter officers are present to conduct the meeting.
All right.
Mayor, just to open up, I think when the council came up with the idea of looking at our budget policies on the jump as we go into our budget cycle, I think it's a good idea to, number one, refresh ourselves as we make preparation of the budgets. We prepare the budget for your review, approval, and adoption. But I felt it was a good idea to start right here. This is really the cornerstone of our budget, are these policies. And with that, Mayor, what we're looking to do today is to present these policies in a Word format. We're gonna, and this is a workshop, so we're gonna put the Word document right in front of you, and we'll go through it a section at a time and do that review and then receive any input from the council. We just got some revisions from Councilmember Hernandez. He has provided some redlined revisions to this document. I'm assuming he'll want to present those to the council for consideration and review. And with that, we're ready to jumpstart.
All right. Mr. Houlihan.
Good morning. Good morning, Mayor and Council.
Good morning.
Christine Garza, my budget manager, is with us. She's going to make the strike-throughs as we have changes, so there might be little pauses there, because if I hit a button while she's making changes, I've been told that won't be a good thing. So
the floor will fall from underneath you and you'll disappear is what happened.
Okay, we just kind of go through them one by one, and if there's areas that we want to discuss further, we can. If not, we can just move on to the next section. These have been in existence since the late 90s and have been changed over the years a little bit. But I'll kind of just go into section 1 is development effective date of financial budgetary policy. It is just city manager is directed to prepare the annual budget according to this policy. And then it also, the last sentence there, that it does remain into effect and applies to future annual budget preparation processes until it's amended by the council. So in other words, we didn't make any changes. The old budget policy would continue in existence. Section 2, pertaining to the general fund, that current operating revenues equal or exceed current budgeted expenditures. Section 3 really starts to get into the meat of the policy. This is the general fund balance policy, and it reads that the general fund unassigned fund balance will total at least 2 months or approximately 17% of operating expenditures up to 25% of annual general fund appropriation. This is a GFOA best practice. It does, and the GFOA does recommend a minimum of 2 months. And it gives a lot of factors to consider, including the predictability of revenues and expenditures, the exposure to significant one-time outlays, and various other areas that are to be considered for different communities.
I think we saw the value of that with Harvey, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And we, at the end of the 18 audited fund balances, we're not quite there yet, but at the end of 17, we were around 21%, which I'm told by bond counsel, I think the magic number there is about 20 that the rating agencies look at. If you fall below that, there's a little bit of a concern.
And Eddie, for fiscal 18, we're at 22.65, so we did grow. So that's good.
So yes, Mayor, it provides for the mechanism of having the reserves in the event of an event like Harvey's. But on the financial side, more importantly, it really has a huge impact on our credit rating and our bond rating. I've seen communities that had to, over decades, build their fund balance where they were a B+, now they're AA. And they did that almost exclusively, not just through sound financial policies, but through building of their fund balance.
The next section, section 4.1, deals with internal service funds. That was changed a couple of years ago. But it does read that in each of in fleet, engineering, stores, facilities, that that they will maintain a fund balance of 3% and a maximum of an additional 2% for a total of 5%. This is an area where we had recommended, Councilman Hernandez sent us also sent some recommendation, but we were going to recommend that we did put the maintain an unassigned reserve, because the fleet does have a very substantial fleet replacement reserve in that fund, somewhere around $4 million typically. I don't know if we want to pass out the recommendations that council. Yeah, you have the copy.
Well, do you want to go through the whole policy first, and then?
Yeah, I'd rather.
Let's
go through the whole policy.
And then,
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, let's.
So and this is with any of these fund balance policies, there's a lag. So right now we're in the middle of preparing the 2020 budget. We will get the FY18 audited fund balances here in the next week or so. So when we prepare the 2020 budget, we don't have a 19 fund balance. We have an estimate of what we think it's going to be. So we take that estimate, and going into 2020 to follow this policy, we would either, if there's in excess of 5%, we would either rebate that back to the paying departments, to the paying funds. Can't just rebate it all back to one fund, because everybody could, water, the utilities also contribute. Or we would, or some combination thereof, or if there are projects that they need to do. For example, last year when we had the facilities, we had $1 million budgeted for, I think, 6 fire roofs and the generator at the Frost Bank building. So we would either budget some one-time expenditures to use up some of that fund balance, or rebate it back, or some combination thereof. The next section is the group health plan, which is also an internal service fund. There are 3 group health plans: the city care, then the fire, and the police. And the current policy reads that we will maintain a fund balance to pay out any administrative costs and any claims run out based upon an actuary study. And then we will, in addition to that, we will hold a reserve for catastrophic claims of 10% of the projected medical and prescription claims, which at the end of fiscal year 17 for the city care fund, that following that policy totaled about $2.7 million that we were required to have in reserve. Now, fire and police includes the other post-employment benefits, which the city care, per their contract, does not include that number. So fire was, per the policy, was about $5 million necessary to be held in reserve, and police was about 7.1. I think the goal is to get all 3 of these plans on the same criteria for the fund balance. The next section goes into the risk funds. The first one, the general liability fund. The policy states that we will maintain a fund balance to fund any long-term liabilities, which is determined by which we get out of an actuary report, and then to provide any protection against significant unexpected claims. We will also, in addition to that, maintain a catastrophic reserve equaling 25% of the average cost over a 5-year period. In FY17, that number amounted to about 6.2 million for those three in order to keep us in line with the three. And also, the number 3 is that we will, because this fund also pays property insurance, so we will also maintain a reserve to cover any significant increases in purchase insurance equaling 25% of the cost over the purchase of the purchase insurance. So this amount total about 6.2 million in FY17. About 5.2 million of that was per the actuary study, long-term liabilities, and then the 25-year average, 25% average of 5-year claims was about 400,000, and the 25% of purchase insurance was about 650,000. Workers' comp fund. The policy is to maintain a fund balance that would fund long-term liabilities. Also comes out of the actuarial report. And then to protect against significant unexpected claims experience, we will maintain a catastrophic reserve equaling 25% of the average of incurred costs of claim experience over a 5-year period. In FY17, the actuarial number for long-term liabilities was 5.6 million, and in breaking that out, the actuarial amount was 5 million, and 25% of claims for a 5-year period was about 580,000. So there's significant fund balances in these two funds. Enterprise funds, water, wastewater, gas, stormwater, airport, marina. The maximum of 25%. Anything above that is transferred into the capital reserves and the capital fund for the utilities, so to be used for pay-as-you-go projects. Next section is the debt service. It's the goal to maintain. Remember, debt service funds for the most part get their money from the department that incurs the debt. So the department transfers the money to the debt service fund. The debt service fund pays the debt. So we maintain a fund balance of 2% of annual debt payments in these debt service funds. Section 5 deals with other post-employment benefits, accrued compensated absences, and net pension liability. This policy just basically says that these liabilities are funded on a pay-as-you-go basis and are not included in the minimum fund balances. Just to give you some idea of the scope of these numbers, at the end of 18, unaudited, haven't finished the audit yet, but preliminarily the other post-employment benefits is about 9.6 million. Accumulated compensated absences is about 42.9 million. And the net pension liability, about 261 million. Section 6 deals with the property tax operations and maintenance. And basically it says if values go down, we will give full consideration to going with the effective tax rate, which if values go down, the effective tax rate is going to be higher than the current tax rate. We haven't been in that situation for quite a while, but contrarily, if values go up, we will give full consideration to maintaining the current tax rate. And then the last, parenthetically there, as long as it doesn't go over the rollback rate of 8%, there is a bill, which probably you are aware of, 2.5%, so that could change here shortly. Section 7 deals with street maintenance. This came into existence when the street maintenance fund was created. It was previously, street maintenance was in a general fund. So we broke out the street maintenance and put it in a separate special revenue fund. This policy says that we will transfer 6% of general fund revenues, less grants, less industrial district revenue, because remember they get 5% of industrial district revenue, And also less any property taxes that are passed through the general fund and transferred to the residential street fund, which in 19 amounted to $3,860,000. Section 8 deals with funding for the residential street reconstruction fund, which came into existence in fiscal year 15, I believe. And we're past some of this, but essentially for 3 years in a row, we used $1 million of the each year for $1 million out of the general fund balance and transferred it to the residential street fund. They also get 5% of industrial district revenue, and then numbers 3, 4, and 5 there. Beginning in 2021, we will transfer 1/3%, less revenues, less grant revenue, less industrial district revenue, and now it's going to be less the pass-through of the property taxes. In other words, it'll be the same base as the street maintenance fund. And then 2/3 and then 1%. There was some conversation, I think Councilman Hernandez has some recommended changes for this. I don't recall when this came about. I think it was just what we thought we could afford. Obviously, it's not going to solve the residential street problem. But this was created in 14, 15, and it's just what we thought we could afford, reasonably afford out of the general fund. Which, you know, 1/3% is around $850,000 currently. Section 9 deals with funding of the Texas Municipal Retirement System, and it states that it's a goal to contribute the fully funded TMRS rate for general fund employees and sworn police officers. And in order to implement this goal, we will increase that by an additional 2% each year until we get to that fully funded rate. Well, if you recall, in January we got there. It's 24.61% is a fully funded rate. So we would recommend that we change this to that we will maintain we will maintain the fully funded contribution rate to TMRS for general city employees and sworn police officers. Section 10 just states that the council recognizes the need to provide services which support the continued growth of the local economy and personal income growth to ensure an adequate financial base for the future. Section 11 directs the city manager that will budget at least $200,000 per year in the general fund as an operating contingency. We try to get more in this. Most of the time we're around 400, but there have been years where it's been right at 200. Section 12 says that we will maintain a multi-year budget module that's included in the budget document, so that we were doing some planning. Section 13 deals with cost recovery from revenues. If you remember last year, we had a fee study that was part of this to ensure that we are, or at least we know when we're not recovering the cost in certain areas, that that's a conscious decision to do that. So we had that fee study done last year. Most departments implemented that fee study. Park and Rec just implemented a small part of it. Section 14 it deals with quarterly financial reports and monitoring. The city manager shall provide interim financial performance reports quarterly provided these to the council. Section 15 states that we will endeavor to use non-recurring revenue to fund only one-time expenditures. A good example of that is the fire ambulance supplemental payment program, which it looks like it's going to be more than 1 year, but there's some uncertainty there, so we use it for capital items, one-time type expenditures. Section 16 is debt management, that we will adhere to the debt management policy adopted in 2010 and amended in 2011. Section 17 deals with the capital improvement program, that as part of the capital budget process, we will update the short and long range capital improvement plans. For the 3-year short-term plan, this will include any projected incremental operating cost in program facilities. For the long-range plan of an additional 7 years for a complete program of 10 years. And we will pursue pay-as-you-go funding where possible to avoid incurring more debt. Section 18 deals with expenditures. Basically states within the limitation of public service needs, statutory requirements, and contractual commitments that the expenditures included in the operating budget shall represent the most cost-efficient method to deliver the service, and that efforts to continue to identify these cost-efficient methods will continue throughout the year, not only at budget time, and it may be implemented at any time during the fiscal year. Section 19 states that we will prepare the budget using a zero-based budget type of process. We don't use a strict zero-based budgeting process. We do use some aspects of zero-based budgeting, including decision packages, including using performance measures and volume metrics to justify the personnel, the number of personnel and the dollars in each department. Section 20 deals with the state hotel occupancy tax fund, which came into existence in 2016, where we get we get 2% of what the state collects. And this policy states that it's not intended to offset the expenditures paid out of the HOT fund for Gulf Beach maintenance. And it specifically states that funding in the Gulf Beach maintenance in the HOT fund won't fall below the lesser of $1,825,000 or 15% of HOT revenue. And then Section 21 was added last year, the drought surcharge exemption fund, stating that this surcharge collected from large volume users should be dedicated only to drought-resistant water supply and shall not be used for operation and maintenance cost of any water supply, treatment facility, or distribution system. Okay, that's the end of the policy. We can go over the changes. What's that? We had amendments on Section 4.1, which is just a word change there, that we will, in the fourth sentence down there, that we will maintain a reserve. We would change that language to we would maintain an unassigned reserve. I guess in a minute. And then we also had a recommended change on
the changes.
Section 8.
Read his skills.
So, excuse me, what you passed out is what you're having proposal, or
well, this is Councilman Hernandez had these recommended changes. This is, I guess we can go over that. I had 3 recommended changes that city staff was recommending.
All right, let's see yours, and then we'll talk to other.
Okay.
So these are yours now. Which one?
These are mine. I had Section 4.1 to where we stipulate that.
Mayor, let me clarify. He's only giving you the verbal recommendation. The handout are the recommendations of Council Member Hernandez that he'll be presenting in a minute.
Okay. So, okay. So let's get staff recommendation, then we'll go to council discussion.
Right.
And recommendation. Right. Okay.
So in Section 4.1, we would specify to maintain an unassigned reserve in each internal service fund, which mostly is going to apply to the fleet maintenance because they have a substantial fund balance, but a large piece of that is for future fleet replacement that is contributed by other funds to that fund in order to replace their fleet.
So right there is where you're... So Mayor, on the 4th line there, staff is recommending the phrase unassigned reserve. Am I correct?
That's correct.
Unassigned reserve.
And then in section 8, number 3, beginning in fiscal year 2021, transfer of 1/3 of 1% to the general fund revenue. We're going to make that language consistent with the section 7 up above. So essentially we have to add transfer of 1% of the general fund revenue, less grants, less industrial district revenue, and the addition would be unless any property taxes pass through the general fund and transferred to the residential street fund.
Can you repeat that?
Number 3, section 8 would read, transfer 1/3 of 1% of the general fund revenue, and then we would put bullets, less grants, industrial district revenue, and any property taxes passed through the general fund and transferred to the residential street reconstruction fund. So it would be on the same, like I said, it would be on the same basis as the transfer to the street maintenance fund. We would calculate the percentage in the same manner. And then that same language would be required for...
Excuse me, can I ask a question here, Mayor?
Yeah.
Okay, we're trying to increase the amount that actually goes to the street fund.
Yes.
And you're basically saying it's one against another, right? It's not in addition to. And it was, at one time, we had $10 or $11 million that we were using street maintenance. And then we passed the street user fee, and the initial amount was that we were going to try to target $15 million in additional funds through the street maintenance, street user fee. But we reduced that amount because the street user fee got reduced from 11 or something in that manner
11.5
to 5. No, well, it's 11.5, but originally it was targeted to be 15 million.
Okay.
When we renegotiated the industrial district contract, $4.5 million or so of the industrial district contract increase allowed us to be able to reduce the street user fee, so that we would still get the 15 million, but only impact the utility user or utility customer $5 something a month or something like that. But we'd still get the 15 million that we were going to get. Now we were playing one against another when we talked about taking some portion of the general fund. We're not increasing the amount. We're putting them one against another. At least that's the way I read it. Maybe I'm making a mistake.
If you look at number 2, that addresses the industrial district. It's just, we don't want to double dip, I guess, if you will, because number 2 says beginning in fiscal 15-16, appropriate and transfer 5% of industrial district revenue to the residential street reconstruction fund. It's section 8, number 2. So we're recommending to leave that.
So we're still.
I think he's dealing with section 7.
Oh.
You on section 7?
Actually, I thought I was in section 8, to be honest with you.
Because section 7 deals with maintenance. Okay, section 7 deals with the maintenance that you were talking about, Councilman Garza. And then section 8 is specifically to reconstruction.
Okay, you're talking residential street reconstruction.
Yes, sir.
So,
and what you were talking about is
so
the normal maintenance is section
okay, so
7.
increases in the industrial district revenues, right, will be taken against, we're still, the original $4.5 million that we were expecting from the increase in the industrial district are still set aside for street maintenance, right?
No.
No.
It's 5% of industrial district revenue goes to the street maintenance fund, and 5% of it goes to the residential street fund, which is 10% total is about 1.1 million.
Okay, my question again is, how close to the $15 million in street maintenance are we actually getting to? Or have we started eroding that already?
Councilman Garza, 15 million is made up by RTA funds and the little bit we get from the general fund and the street maintenance fee, which is 11 million. That makes up the $15 million program that we have for street maintenance. The industrial district that they're talking about, I think now for residential street reconstruction, it goes into a different fund. It's not even, it's into 1042.
I'm just going to go back in history. My recollection is that we were targeting $15 million
Yes,
additional
$15 million
street
program.
maintenance. So
Yes. Yes.
we weren't taking into account, we were already getting RTA assistance with streets.
That made up the 15 million.
No, ma'am. The original intention and the original proposal was to increase our street maintenance program by $15 million. And at some point in this conversation, when we're talking about the street user fee, a couple of council members that say, hey, we're going to get an increase in the industrial district contract, so therefore we can just reduce that amount of funds that we have to increase in the street user fee, and we can reduce that amount.
Right.
And that amount that I remember was about $4.5 million.
Right. At the beginning, it was 15 million. They were trying to talk about the street fee being enough to get that 15 million. It was reduced. They didn't want the charge to be that high. They reduced it down, and the funds they supplemented it with was RTA contributions. When they renegotiated the RTA agreement, that fund all goes to street maintenance on all street classifications. And additionally, it wasn't enough to make the 15 million, and it was at that time, I think it was Mark Scott that made the motion to have general fund put in the additional, I think it's like 1 million, 2 million something. That is how the 15 million is made up over here. Now there may be talk about they were going to get industrial district agreement monies, but when they did finally get the industrial district amount monies, it goes into what is now 1042 for residential street reconstruction. And that's what has happened. So still today, it's a $15 million program when you take a look at all the people that's involved in it, but it's made up of RTA revenues, the 11.4 about per year street maintenance fee, and then an amount that is put in by the general fund for street maintenance. That is what makes up the program.
The original request, or the original ask, was for 30 million total.
Yes.
Where are we at against the 30 million total? Because we were spending about 10, 11, or excuse me, closer to 15 million, and we'd say we need an additional 15 million. Where are we at in terms of budgetary numbers? Where are we at in terms of street maintenance dollars?
Okay. Well,
I just want to make sure that we're not eroding those numbers like we did years ago, and that's
right.
got us in the pickles we were.
We budgeted about 15.5 million for street preventative maintenance program in fiscal year 19. 15.5 million.
I have this chart, and we put it, this is a chart we made, but it's kind of outdated. It shows how much of the revenues.
Okay.
I don't know. What we have is a chart here of how much of the revenues we've received with the street maintenance fee and how much we've expended. This is a chart we had put online. We've never gone above the 30 million. We've just been a $15 million a year program. And so year by year, it's accumulated. And
He's saying it's 15 million, so in essence, we initiated a street user fee, and all we did was pull money back out of street maintenance. The total amount, the goal was to get to $30 million a year in street maintenance so we can get our streets to last 30 years.
31.6?
Okay,
Yeah.
that's where we're at, okay, that's what I want to know.
For the total in the street
Okay.
maintenance fund, yes.
It's total.
okay.
Okay.
It's the maintenance
All right.
fee plus.
Well, then don't worry about that. That's online.
And that's been over the last few years, I mean, that's what it is.
Yes. Yes.
31 million a year for the last,
Yes, sir.
since 2013 or 2014.
Well, we started in 2014.
Okay.
January 2014.
Okay. 31.6. All right. I'm good.
I hope everybody's okay. All right.
All right, to Mr. Hernandez.
Mayor, I'll hold on until they go through their changes and I'll describe mine.
Okay.
So that was the changes proposed for Section 8, and the other change would be for Section 9.
Just one, since you're on the street fee, now where does the 2 cent that's we implemented last year out of the 6 that we could vote or approve, where does that reflect in this policy? Or does it, this policy, I mean, we did it last year, so we may not have
It's not
incorporated into the policy.
It's not in this policy, but the 2% is
2 cents.
taken into revenue. 2 cents was taken into revenue in the general fund and transferred to the residential street fund.
Okay. Okay.
Total $3,860,000.
Okay, but it's not part of this policy? All right, do we need to make it part of this policy, or is that just, that's an understood dedicated fund?
It is an understood, unless you want to make some kind of future commitment as part of this policy.
Well, I think we told the voters that if you authorize us for 2 cents, that's where it's going. So we need to have some policy, because none of us are going to be here forever, and the policy can be changed, but I think the covenant with the voters was 2 cents up to 6 over however long it takes to implement it is dedicated to residential streets. And so somewhere in the policy, I think we need to reflect that. I don't know whether it's here or where, but somewhere.
And I'd like to see it state in there, be reconstruction, so it doesn't get shifted over into maintenance.
So that would be Section 8. I was going to say that. Yes, sir.
All right. Well, think about where we need to put it and how we need to word it, but I think to keep good faith with the voters, that was what it was sold on, that 60% or better approval, so that I think we've got an obligation.
Needs to be in the policy.
Okay.
And then the other change we would recommend would be Section 9 on the funding of the Texas Municipal Retirement System. We would just change it to say that the city council the goal of the council is to contribute the fully funded contribution rate to TMRS to fund the general city employees and sworn police officers' pension, period. Because we are at the fully funded rate currently.
We've achieved that.
And that's going to change from year to year. So we would eliminate that last part there in order to implement this goal. Beginning in fiscal year 16, an additional 2% will be added each year. We would eliminate that sentence because we've achieved that.
Well, we're at the level right now. So it took us 4 years, but as outlined in this policy, we finally got there. So this year we're at the fully funded rate.
So the question I have is just if the actuarials change, which they have done over the last few years, then you change the contribution?
Yes.
The city's contribution will change?
Correct. And you'll see that during the budget process when we bring that forward.
Well, we wouldn't change the amount of extra percentage contribution we've done over the last 4 or 5 years to catch up?
No.
Can you say that one more time, please?
Okay. If the actuarials change and you
Yes,
have
sir.
to add or increase your contributions, right?
Correct.
You don't have to set a percent
Correct.
increase because we've already caught up, right?
That is
And
correct.
The goal would be just to stay caught up, right?
Yes, sir. That's our goal.
Okay.
Yes, sir. That's correct.
All right.
Okay, that's all the changes. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
We've been adding an additional 2% every year to be caught up. And
Yes,
you're
sir.
saying we're caught up.
Yes, sir.
So that frees up how much money? That 2%?
In the general fund, how much is that, Eddie? $1 million?
1.4 million.
Yeah, 1.4 million.
But we do expect it to go up a little bit in fiscal year 2020. We don't know how much, not 2%, but it could be like 0.75% or a little bit, but not 2%.
Okay.
So,
I know I'm not, but
Well, I mean,
since
we're
it's pension, I'd like to comment on that. So I think what we're saying is we're on a level now that will pay off our unfunded liability over the amortization period, that we're not going to be going down. We have to maintain, if the actuarial assumptions don't change, we're not saving any money. The rate, the 24% we're paying, is based on that being paid off in 25 years.
we're not saving any money. We just won't have to deal with that additional
Right.
1
We have to maintain that current contribution rate so our actuarial adequacy. And one thing that's not being discussed here is our fire liability. Now, that is a separate pension, and it's administered by an independent board, but we are ultimately responsible for that. So the numbers that Mr. Houlihan gave us did not include the $90 million actuarial underfunding we have in that. And that pension is not as good as what we have here. So we're sitting up here with one set of numbers, but we're leaving a big one that's not addressed in this document. And since it is independently administered, it's a little bit different. But the city of Corpus Christi has the ultimate responsibility for the soundness of that pension, just like we do with the other. We got an independent board and they're doing it. So nothing in this document reflects anything about our firefighters pension fund, which is, depending on what number you look, we're about 59 to 61% funded. So we're 40%, $90 million underfunded in that one. And the actuarial assumptions on it too are more liberal, the investment returns, the mortality tables, the other kind of thing. So as the actuaries adjust it, it's more likely to say, uh-oh, you know, we goofed on this one, we're going to need more money.
And Councilmember Smith, we will be bringing a TMRS presentation in the month of April. Would you also like one for the firefighter pension?
If the rest of the council, yeah.
Yes, okay. All right, yes,
Yeah.
sir. We'll have that scheduled.
Yeah, we need to know where we are and what our exposure is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, that's all of the changes that the
Mr.
staff
Roy,
was recommending.
Are you related to this topic right here?
Yes. So my question is on section 9. Are you recommending then clarifying that part at the end there as far as where we stand now and where we need to maintain?
I didn't have that in the recommendation. We were just recommending eliminating the last sentence and just saying that it's the goal to contribute the fully funded contribution rate to TMRS to fund the general city employees and sworn police officers' pension. We could put a sentence in there that says that this the goal of reaching the fully funded contribution rate was achieved in January of 2019, and in the future
to maintain
that
yes.
fully funded rate.
I think that would be good just for historical.
Okay.
4 years from now, somebody may read that and they'll understand.
Right. Okay.
And Councilmember Roy, prior to this fiscal year, we were contributing on an ad hoc basis. So now we are finally at the annually repeating basis. So we can definitely add a sentence in there noting that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Can I ask one more question? So this document, in terms of, we were talking earlier about looking at the overall rating of the city. By putting those things in there, does that help in the future as far as somebody looking at this and knowing that we've achieved that goal?
It does, yes, sir, because every time we have a rating call with the bond agencies, they ask, where are you with your retirement situation?
Okay.
And so it's very good that we had a plan, we achieved that plan, and now we're going to maintain it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, that's all of the changes that staff had recommended. We can go over the Councilmember Hernandez's items.
Before you do that, let me just ask one question. And I may be speaking out of ignorance or out of not wanting to be politically correct, but your section 19 zero-based budgeting, in my humble opinion, is a joke. I mean, it sounds good. We get to beat our chest. 90% of our expenses are fixed. You can't go back to zero. You don't have much wiggle room in a budget. So this zero-based budgeting, I mean, that's a farce. It sounds good on the TV soundbite, but the reality of it is 90% of your expenses are fixed. You don't have an option. So why do we put it in here? Does that sound good to the bonding rating, or does it make people get fuzzy feelings all over when they see a TV interview and we're doing zero-based budgeting, or what?
It was a recommendation to put in there by previous council.
Well, I know, but I'm not interested in fuzzy feelings. I'm interested in reality. And zero-based budgeting, and the staff, from what I understand, when they did it back then, I mean, we spent enormous amount of time trying to understand it and implement it and all this sort of stuff. The bottom line is 90% of your expenses are fixed. So, I mean, we just shadowboxing for spending staff time shadowboxing. We're not accomplishing anything.
It's a very time-consuming process, and I don't think we've looked at it in the last year, but 3 years ago when we looked out across the United States, I think there was only 2 or 3 communities that really, it was, I think, Charlotte's, North Carolina, and I don't remember the 1 or 2 others, but for the fiscal year 17 budget, we were on that path, and the city manager left in May, and but it was basically going through every department, listing what their services are and what would be the minimum service that you could provide, either because there's a law that requires it or some ordinance, and then what's a enhanced service level, what's a less of a service level, and you have to go through all that and make decisions. You build the budget from that, using that process. We're going to go with the current service level here, an enhanced service level here, a reduced service level here, because there's a lot of areas that there's some kind of a law that requires some kind of minimum. Some departments could be eliminated, but not saying we want to do that, but they could. There's no law that requires that they're in existence, but.
I mean, go ahead. I mean, that's just my personal feeling. I think it's an exercise in futility, personally.
You're right. There's a lot of the budgeting process and things that we do that are costs that are fixed. But let's say, for instance, I'm just going to use an example of the internal service funds, right? This last year, in my opinion, we spent a lot more in IT support for the utility department because of all the issues they had related to the software conversion, right? And us having missed billings and having issues with our billing system. And so I think you got to go back in an area where it's been really dynamic and has had some changes, has some challenges. Then you got to go back and start from zero. You can't just take and say we have an increase in our IT costs and just spread that increase over to the police department or fire when they've got other needs that they need to, and their departments haven't been, affected or haven't been the area that's contributed to that increase in cost. And so I guess some areas, I think you have to go back and you have to almost start from ground zero. It doesn't mean that it's going to be a whole lot different. It may still even go up, but I think in terms of allocation, you've got to go back and you've got to start zero in particular areas or departments, that budget items that have had a lot of change.
Yes, Councilman
welcome your feedback.
You're spot on with that. IT is an internal service fund department, and every year we go through the allocations and allocate out to the departments that were the recipients of whatever services were provided. So we do that every year with the internal service funds during the allocation process, during the budget process.
So do you also, in those particular cases, do you also, like say for us to be fleet or whether it be IT, if they've got some major project or some major change, some innovative project that's going to be coming in the pipeline, increase
that specific department.
That specific department's
yes,
area.
Right. Yes, right. It doesn't go citywide.
So you just don't spread out the additional cost over the department, so that okay.
Yes, sir. You're right.
Okay. Thank you.
Can I dovetail on that?
Sure.
So, if I understand what you're saying, if we eliminated what the mayor's saying, if we eliminated Section 19 and we did away with saying that this zero-based budgeting type of process, there's still going to be departments that you have to basically still adhere to that zero-based.
Yes, by accounting principles, we have to for an internal service fund. So we'll do that whether it's in there or not.
So what's the benefit of us stating Section 19? What's the benefit of this? Does it?
Well, I think it was a direction from a prior city council. We can remove it. I don't think it would have an impact, Eddie, would it? We can remove it, right?
Well, sure. We can remove anything that you choose to remove.
Well, I mean,
would it make a substantial? I think there are aspects of zero-based budgeting that we think are great. The decision packages that we use, using some metrics and some performance metrics and volume metric to determine the number of people. Now, in some areas, it's fairly simple to establish that you need 10 kennel technicians to clean the kennels because you got 500 kennels and they're 95% full all the time, and it takes 15 minutes a day to clean them. But it's not so simple in some other areas. It really comes down to the number of personnel you have. It's not so simple in finance or budget or maybe code, even though we know how many code violations you get. But you could always argue that if we were doing a better job, we wouldn't have that many code violations. But we still want to use some aspects of it we think is very beneficial.
Do what you want. I mean, I just think it was the flavor of the month at the time, and they implemented it. And maybe I'm just coming from a private sector pace that, you budget. I don't know. It just I'm just not in it for the feel-good part, but if you think it, you know, let you sleep better at night to have it in here and you get 3 attaboys, well, that's fine. But I just remember and hearing when this all went through it, the staff just moaned and groaned because it ate up a lot of staff time, and the numbers came out about the same. I mean, I don't know that there was a whole lot accomplished because of the exercise, but other than people feeling good. Anyway, let's move on. We're taking too much time on this. Go ahead.
Ms. Sanchez, you mentioned, or Mr. Hulan, we can do certain departments. This doesn't, if it's in here, does it apply to every single department or no?
It was every single
It
department.
did say all, yes.
Yes.
Right, but does it have to be that way?
If it's in.
No.
No. Right.
could do a-
So if you,
I mean,
what?
no, I mean, the bottom line is if you've got good management, you're probably doing this anyway, just as a matter of routine.
Yeah.
So
if there are departments that this may fit best with, then why not just use it on those departments, as Councilman Garza explained, and not the ones he is referring to that probably don't need it because they are fixed? Can we do that? And you can give us a recommendation on which departments those would be a better fit for this particular policy.
Sure.
I think the accounting mechanism lends to the practice. So I think by eliminating the section, those that are going to be applicable to zero-based budgeting are going to fall into that anyway. If we keep it in there, then we have to adhere to that. So what we're trying, so the thing is, if you take it out, then you don't have to adhere to it. But
that's what I was asking. I
That's
thought
correct.
you said you can apply it to just certain departments.
yeah, if
Correct.
we take it out.
No, if you leave it in.
No.
Can you all answer that?
you leave
Yes,
it in, you got to
it's-
apply it to all.
Right. If you leave
Okay,
it in, it
that's what I was
applies to all
asking.
the departments.
Okay, that's what
And we-
initially I was asking. I thought you were saying it doesn't. I thought you meant we could apply it to just
But
what
the
y'all
accounting
think.
rules do apply to
Right.
to certain ones, the internal service funds.
I had one more follow-up, okay? And again, I know how much work it is to go back and reconstruct all the justification of all the costs, but in a case, say for instance, if you've got some department that's done something relatively innovative, we've invested the capital, and you should see, like say for instance, we went to electronic or automated meter reading, there should have been a reduction in cost. And so there's got to be some trigger mechanism that says you're not just going to continue, you know, using the same resources you've always used if you've invested in something that should save you some manpower or save you some resources. And so you should look back at that and say, okay, now that we've invested in this capital program or this particular equipment or this software, whatever it is, you say, hey, we want to see an analysis. We want to see a justification for the headcount that you've had all these other years.
Yes, sir, you're exactly right. And that's what we do every year.
You do that anyway?
Yes,
Okay.
sir, we do
All
that
right.
anyway.
Okay.
And that's why it said zero-based type, because we are doing that. All the departments are doing that. And we have budget meetings with the executive staff, and you have to justify every single dollar in your budget. The department directors do, before it comes forward to council.
So does that actually get verified or monitored by the audit group, our city auditor, or do you know? I mean, do we have any?
I don't
no?
believe the auditor is involved in that part. We present it to the executive management, and then it comes to council for review.
So
and
we see that, and I remember some reports that were actually pretty good in some of the departments related to their budget requests and what some of the things that they've done and their goals. But in some of the other departments, I didn't see any of that
Okay, well,
positive, direction reporting.
okay, but all the departments do go through the exact same process. And during the budget process in years past, each department would come up and present their information. I think in some years, we summarize it by fund types. So we definitely are open to how you would like to see it this year when we come forward with the budget.
All right.
Those instances that you mentioned would be a decision package. In some cases, the department is told we need a decision package in order to enhance code enforcement in some specific area. And so they're challenged to bring us a decision package either by adding personnel or by purchasing some system that better tracks this particular, and they have to, on the decision package, they get to give us quite a bit of information, how much revenue would be generated if there is any, how much expenditure it would cost, or what expenditures they would save by doing this particular thing. So most of those items would be in a decision package. And like I said, in some cases they're directed to bring a decision package addressing this, But they're always challenged to bring us any decision packet that you have that may cost some money up front, but in the long run saves us money. But we challenge them to do that.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Okay. So that was your changes, or
that was our changes, yes, sir.
okay. So, Mr. Hernandez, you got some questions or suggestions or something?
Right. I actually have been looking at this document for the last several months, and I also did some research with other cities and what some of the practices there are there. And so I had some recommendations here. I didn't touch the items that had to do with insurance because I figured our insurance experts over there on the other side would be able to address that. So I want to make sure, since you're the expert on that. Oh, well, finance, mortgages. Also, so specifically starting off with item 4.1, and this is a recommendation to go from the 3 an additional 2% to a total of 5% to just the 3%. I'm finding that in looking at the budget, the balances for last year were all either at or above 5%, and then fleet was somewhere in the 24% in terms of, but now if you want to carve out fleet for a specific item with the vehicle replacements or however you want to do that, we can carve that out. But I think for the rest of the other internal services funds, they should be at 3%. It should be enough. Secondly, and this is a policy that probably needs to address beyond that, is taking engineering services out of the internal services fund. That it would make more sense to have, do zero-based budgeting on them, find out what their costs are, and go from there. Now, that wouldn't apply to CIP projects or to other funds like the enterprise funds or things like that where they would have to charge them. But for anything within the general fund, they should be able to determine what their costs are based on their salaries and their expenses. I don't think that it should be part of the internal service fund, and I hadn't seen it that way in other cities. They're actually, a lot of times, they're combined with the facilities department or asset management or public works, right? So that should be something that we should really take consideration and get it out of the internal services funds. And I was looking at last year's budget. They were budgeted for $7 million with revenue somewhere around there, but it came around $5 million. So it wasn't quite, and revenues and expenses. And then I couldn't see from Q1 because I didn't see any revenues in Q1 at all from the reporting. So I think we need a better idea of what's going on there as opposed to having our engineers fill out time cards for everything within the general fund. That doesn't make sense. So that's my recommendation there for 4.1.
And Mr. Hernandez, I just want to make one little point of clarification that assets and facilities are an internal service fund. So it would still be, but it wouldn't be by itself. It would be included with.
I got you. But even then, I mean, the way we're using it, I think would be maybe even something we do in the general fund. We'll have. I mean, it's something to have a discussion with budget-wise just to make that make more sense.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Item number 6. Now, this is, in looking at that legislation, I believe right now the proposed number is 2.5%. I would imagine this would be the one where we actually changed that in parenthetical item here where it says 8% for the rollback to 2.5%.
If that bill passes, yes.
If it passes.
Yeah.
Or whatever that amount is. Right. We'll have to change this to reflect that.
Whenever it passes.
Right.
But I wouldn't recommend doing that right now. Okay.
Okay, it's just a denote, that's why I put it in there. Going to section number 8, and I highlighted this area because it seemed like it was put in there as a placeholder as opposed to just having some realistic policy. I think that should just be eliminated to 1% only, and then get rid of the 1/3 of 1%, the 2/3 of 1%, and to Councilman Garza's point, to have some more long-term clarity as to the reconstruction fee. I also included a recommendation to look at street bond packages and any funds that are unencumbered or that are from completed bond packages to be used for residential street reconstruction. To Councilman Smith's point, to really look at it, because at the rate we're going, we're not going to, I mean, it's going to take us, what, 400 years? 400 years to finish, so we want to add more funding to that. And this is not to eliminate future sources of funding beyond that.
And Mr. Hernandez, I just need to check with our bond counsel, because if the bond package was for arterial and collector, I'm not sure if we repurpose it, if it has to be for an arterial and collector. Let me verify that, and I'll get back to you. Yeah, I'll get back to you on that. Okay.
And this could impact current projects that are using those kind of, so we would have to restructure some things, potentially.
In addition, you have to consider, in this last bond package, we used some savings from the previous bonds for design for future bonds, so we could start like the Type B projects, which were 100% design at the time where the bond passed, so we can speed up the process.
That's accounting. That's accounting. That money will come back to that.
No, but if you restrict it to just residential street, you're limiting your ability to do those things.
We would not have been able to do the 100% design on the 3 projects and the 60% design on the other projects with this policy.
Well, I mean, these are some, and I appreciate Mr. Hernandez getting in this, and I don't know, you'd mentioned in one meeting that you'd gotten some information from Sylvia, and maybe you gotten a lot of insight on this, but then you've had it for several months. But these are some pretty substantial changes that I'm not comfortable with getting it presented here and asking for an adoption. I'd like for the staff to be able to respond. I don't know how long. Is this the first time you've seen your changes?
No, this is, I thought there was no action item.
No action.
No, but I mean, is this the first time they've seen your suggested changes?
Well, yes. I mean, I gave it to them yesterday.
I mean, before we do anything, I'd like to get staff's response, because some of these are pretty substantial, and I'm just now thumbing through them for the first time, so we can discuss them, but I don't know that we need to have a lot of banter back and forth to get them out there, and then we get a response back. Because I don't have any problem with looking at what we have, but on the first shot, I mean, we could be spending a lot of time, and you've got to have a chance, like you say, bond counsel and others. So anyway, go ahead. I appreciate the work you're doing, because it always needs to be done, but they need to have an opportunity to give you an assessment of. Go ahead.
Okay, in section 11, there's some clarity that needs to be placed here, because the way it's written, we have several different enterprise funds and have several different internal service funds, and we have several different special revenue funds. So that $200,000 could be for each one of those funds. So you could be a substantial amount of money. Just want to have some clarity, and plus looking at the total amount, and you can do it from general fund or do a combination of all the funds, but have a limit to that of about $500,000 total, as opposed to, I mean, what it could be in terms of. Do you see what I'm saying in terms of clarity?
So that's for all the funds, because the way it.
Yes, that's for all the funds.
Okay, because the way it read before was $200,000 for general fund.
Correct.
And each of the other individual funds.
Right. So looking at total for not just the general fund, but for all funds, total of $500,000.
Okay.
Can I just ask a question? Mm-hmm. Is it possible maybe that with your changes, I know that verbally we're talking about this, but can you maybe also go back and state the purpose of what you were thinking?
Sure. I mean, in terms of this one, I looked at contingency funds for other cities and what their amounts were. For example, I'll use an example of El Paso, which is double the size of what we are. Their contingency fund for the entire thing is $1 million. That's it. That's all they get. That's all the city manager gets in his, operating contingency. So just looking at it from perspective of what amounts he really needs, this should be, what if you look at what you've been spending over the last time frame? I hate to call it this, but this is basically a slush fund.
Got it.
So we just want to make sure that we have control and visibility over that. And if they need more to add to this, we can add, that can be requested. Okay, section 14, just to add some more information on the reporting and monitoring. Want to make sure we include the status of any reserve funds balances within the within this reporting, within the quarterly reporting. Section 17. Now, this one I made a little more robust because realistically, we don't have a lot of policy around capital improvement projects. It's really what this paragraph is here and a slight verbiage in the charter. This one makes it a little bit more clear as to what these are, and specifically, and you can read through some of those items to describing the long-range plan, the short-range plan, and then the actual annual capital budget for the current year. And in terms of transferring funds and then also encumbering funds for within those plans. So if we have encumbered funds that go beyond the short-range plan, then we're not using those properly. Those encumbered funds should be ready to be used within that short-range plan. So if we have any that go beyond 3 years in terms of encumbered funds, to me that's just a way to hide funds. So
wait a minute, we're needing I need a little more clarification. First we heard a slush fund a minute ago, and now we're hiding funds. I mean, if you've got some specifics, let's point them and see what they are. I mean, the innuendo is not real good in policy discussion.
Okay, so specifically.
Got a specific, or somebody's told you about a specific?
No.
Bring it out.
No, specifically, if you look at in Section 17, Section B, it says no funding project shall be encumbered beyond 3 years of the short-range CIP. No bonds, general revenue obligations or revenue, or certificates of obligation shall be sold for projects that are not a part of the short-term CIP. So that's just good policy. That has nothing to do with innuendo or anything like that. It's just policy in terms of what it should be. I'm just saying if we don't put something like this in place, it can be abused. And okay, that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that it is abused or it is not. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. I'm just saying it can be if you don't have those kind of policies in place.
Yeah, hold on just 1 second.
Yeah, for most of us on this council, I have a specific of the slush fund that when the Harbor Bridge was hung in the balance, what was it, in 2017, for doing the pool, we needed $700,000 to fix that pool, and TxDOT was ready to pull the funding on that. Well, we used that slush fund to fix the pool, and our $880 million Harbor Bridge project is ongoing. So that's an example of the slush fund.
And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just...
That's why we need... That's why we need these kind of monies, and I kind of agree with the mayor how we categorize this. Having these contingency funds is important.
It's not truly a slush fund.
It's a contingency fund.
Well, it's savings from other programs, from other projects that were used to fund these specific items. Okay.
And then there's also reserve balances. So I mean, this is a contingency that is fully in control of the city manager. That's something completely separate.
And that's where that money came from that city manager's fund. So this has been our practice with it.
No, that's fine. I didn't say eliminate it. I just said be more clarity and have more clarity around it instead of, because the way it's written, this could be a really large sum of money. I mean, if you look at it from the internal service funds, how many we have, it doesn't say the aggregate, it says internal service fund. Okay, so that could mean every internal service fund, every special purpose fund, every enterprise fund instead of them as a group. So it needs to be clarified. Okay, now I hate to say this, Mayor, but I disagree with you on the zero-based budgeting. I think that should be a good practice. I have to agree with Councilman Garza on this, that there are points in times where you have to look at what you're actually spending so you don't just add on top of it like on a regular basis for some of these funds. Be very thorough and looking at what your actual costs are, specifically in places like the Internal Services Fund. So I think that should be more specific as well. The last one is I added a section, and this is substantial. It's amendments to the budget. I don't think we have any policies regarding to amendments to the budget once the budget is approved. If you look at our current budget, and as a matter of fact, even in our last council session, there were several items in there that were never budgeted or even an account created for that particular budget. And it's not to say it's wrong or the expenditures are wrong. It's just saying they just won't have clarity. For example, all the ones for the utilities that were for the wastewater treatment plants were never budgeted in the original approved budget. It was funding that was added to the budget and then the account was created for those particular projects. So I want to have some visibility to that in terms of what that should mean in terms of what is authorized for department heads to transfer within their budgets, and then how much funding can be transferred from one department to another within the approved budget. So this just gives us some visibility to City Council in terms of what the inner workings are of the actual budget. Because if you look at the amended budget and the approved budget, they're very different. And those are my recommendations. And like I said, I don't think there's any action today, but I'm sorry, did you have?
Yes, sir, I just wanted to make a point of clarification. So when the budget is adopted every year, each department director has a bottom line amount that they are responsible for. And the way the practice currently is the department directors can make transfers in between their different orgs within their fund, within their department, but they cannot exceed the bottom line amount that was appropriated by the City Council. If we do, then we have to come back to City Council for approval, if you're appropriating out of fund balance or anything like that. So that's the way the process currently works for the operating departments.
Okay, and that's fine. I want to codify it in policy, and then if you want to make tweaks to how the verbiage is, that's okay to make sure it's working within that, but actually the dollar amounts, visibility to City Council, and understanding where money is and where it's being spent. Ultimately, this is our responsibility as City Council to manage that budget. And specifically, there's another line in here, and I'm sorry, I tried to wordsmith it for a good hour, I want to say, but it might be something to look at there. The number 1 in section 22, where any additional revenue that is projected that was not part of the original budget should come to City Council for allocation.
Yes, sir, and it does. But
yeah.
This is just codifying it. Yes, sir, got it.
You.
Okay.
And again, my wordsmithing, just want to make sure, please take time to look at it, make sure it fits what we need. Thank you.
All right. Well, I appreciate all the work, but I think we need to get a response from the staff and see. I mean, some of this may be done in what we're doing, so we appreciate that. Anything else, Mr. Garza?
Yeah, along the lines of Constance, when you talked about the departments and they have some needs in a particular line item and they don't, but is there any kind of a review where you look at, because I mean, the experience that I've had is that some department heads or directors are better than others in terms of being able to forecast their budget needs. And a lot of times, and I remember some that didn't do a very good job and they'd rob from this other line item. And coming from a purchasing background, you'd see a charge to a particular item that had nothing to do with what the expenditure was. And over time, if you don't come back and make adjustments in the following year's budget, you're not going to have a true picture of whether this piece of equipment is costing you more than it would cost if you replaced it, and get short-term payback, or whether, you're doing something inefficient with your employees, or what the story is for decision packages going forward and for maybe another department or maybe a shuffle of department heads. You don't have the information you need to have in order to make really good decisions. So is there any practice that we have, either from an audit standpoint or from a finance standpoint or budgeting standpoint, to go back and actually say, hey, we had a huge amount of line item transfers that we need to look at?
You're exactly right, and that's what we do. We want to charge expenditures to the correct code, not just somewhere that has money. We want to make sure that it's properly reflected, because at the end of the year, when we do the financial report, we want to make sure the expenditures are showing up properly. So the way it works now is the department's budget it's called a control budget. So it's a bottom line operating amount. And so as long as that amount is positive, then we can post expenditures to the correct codes. What we like to do is actually move the budgets, but that's more time consuming. Is that correct? Do we do that?
No, we move the budgets.
Oh, we do. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. There's a budget transfer form that has to be signed by the department director, the person doing it, the department director, and then it goes to the budget department, and then the budgets are actually moved from one area to the proper account.
And you do
currently.
You do that with feedback from the department or from the department head?
It's initiated by the department.
Yeah, it's initiated by the department, and then during the annual budget preparation, departments are required to look at their previous year's expenditures and see if they misbudgeted in a particular line item and adjust that for the coming year. So if they budgeted in one line item but actually were spending here and we had to do a transfer, they're required to go in and review those line items and adjust for the future year. So we eliminate that, that process of transferring. I mean, it occurs every year, but we try to, so they adjust it correctly every year.
And they give you a justification of what?
Yes, most of the time most of the time it's items that come to council. It's bigger project, bigger purchases that something occurred during the year, and they say we have to limit the expenditure here, and we need to move the budget here because a piece of equipment broke or some new software came out, and it will be beneficial for us. So they present it to us, we do the adjustment, and it usually comes to you guys because it's larger items.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
And that's important, Mayor, to note how sophisticated that system is in terms of that line item movement. A lot of organizations don't have that, and a department would move line items and then bring their budget back the exact same year and be moving line items again the following year, and it's a continual rolling effort. Departments have tended to do that, and this is a very sophisticated methodology to make sure that red flags are raised and that we get those line items in as good a sync as possible coming into the budget processes.
Okay, good. Mr. Barrera?
Yes, if you could also have, and you probably will, have some type of worksheet that defines what the fund balances are. Earlier when Mr. Houlihan, right?
Yes.
Was indicating, the fund balance and the reserves for the health plan and for the pension plan. So that way we can, instead of, I was taking notes, but that way that information is readily available. And then what the financial impact to those fund balances would be, say, for example, of any recommendations that you either have or Councilman Hernandez's recommendations, such as the item of which we spoke of with the city manager. So that way we can actually see, whereas he's saying that it's in excess of $1 million per each contingency or whatever the case is.
And when you get the second quarter report, which would be the quarter ending in March, or in the May timeframe, then you will have the audited fund balance for fiscal year 18 in that report.
Well, no doubt, no doubt. I'm sure it'll be there. However, at one point I feel like Charlie Brown, and he's talking like his teacher and what have you. So I just need to be able to identify it and bring it down to a Reader's Digest level for me, if you don't mind.
So just like a summary, one page of all the funds?
Exactly.
Yes, sir. We can do that.
Absolutely.
No problem.
Hey, Mr. Hunter?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll be real quick. Just for some of the newer people on council, the zero-based budgeting started actually back when Larry Elizondo was on council. And the discussions were, I'm not sure if y'all actually implemented it or then, but the reason it says type of process is because of, we've already discussed this, the limitations of what y'all are able to predict. And I highly suggest reaching out to past council members, because that was one of the most thorough discussions that y'all probably had during that time period for workshops. Quick question of the two, number 11, internal service funds, that'll be the 200,000 per year operating contingency for the internal. Do we know that number, how many internal service funds that is? I didn't get that. I think someone asked it earlier, but just off the top of your head. If not, we can get that later.
Do we know what amount's budgeted in those funds for
the 200,000? How many different internal service funds?
Well, the 200,000 applies only to the general fund in this policy. It's as an operating contingency as part of the general fund expenditures. So the 200,000 applies just to the general fund.
So,
okay.
But then it's also at the bottom, the last sentence is the city manager is also directed to budget similar operating contingencies at expenditures.
Yeah,
it doesn't say specifically how much.
Okay.
But the 200,000, it was for the general fund.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
that was a clarity I was looking for. There's not clear what that amount is.
Now I understand.
And in order to use that, we would have to write a memo to the city manager and to explain why we're taking money out of that contingency.
And I do like your recommendation on number 14. I think that that would probably save you all a lot of emails from me. And I know that y'all are very good at getting us that information, but I think that's a great suggestion. I just want to throw that out there.
Okay, Mr. Smith?
Well, thank you. And I like the quarterly reports. I think you guys are doing a good job of putting it out there. You have the management discussion section on your quarterly budget updates. We got a lot of information. We're spending $800 million a year. There's lots of lines on there, and again, I'd like to compliment you on that. I think for the new members on council, in the last council, we did scourge some of our funds on there, and we violated Section 15. We took some of that money out of those funds, and we spent it on operating expenditures with it. But I would advise caution as we're cranking down or thinking about. We did that before. We saw with Harvey the importance of having liquidity, and if you go through our ratings, we have $1.6 million in debt, and our cash balances are something that they look at the rating agencies look at very hard with it. So if we are cranking down more, we did, the last council cranked them down some on that. So I have a lot of concern on taking these two bare minimums and possibly I won't say endangering our credit rating, but this is one component of many components that are looked at. So it seems to us to be a lot of money, but you have looking at Port Aransas when Harvey hit and how it just devastated their balance sheet, and Port Aransas's reserves as a percentage were much greater than ours. At that time, if Harvey was 20 miles further south than what it did, that our reserves would have been exhausted in no time. So my personal take is to be cautious when we're looking at bringing down any reserve limits on those funds. So thanks.
Okay. Well, I think you've heard the discussion on the policies and need to get your reaction to them, but I think that the policies have to be realistic and get a response. And I think we need to be careful what, like Mr. Smith was saying, is that we do no harm to the institution in terms of our bonding capacity, our bonding rating, but we show good fiscal discipline as far as the council goes, but we've got to be realistic, and the pressure's on all of us. Cut, but we were elected to do and keep the city going in a good, positive fashion, and I think you got to run in order to do that. And so be very candid in your responses, and working together, I think we'll get there, and I think we're doing a great job. I'm not aware of any conspiracy or anybody trying to do anything other than the best that's in the best interest of the city. So, and I think you're doing a great job, and I can tell you, as close as we are to, we can still see Harvey in our rear view mirror. We're not that far away from it. That those reserves certainly came in handy, because a lot of those expenses, what allowed us to get moving quickly was that they're reimbursable. You got to put the money up front, you get reimbursed, but you got to have the funds to do it. And so all that has to be taken into account. Any more discussion on item number 1 than anybody on the council? All right, you're going to go to number 2, to a brief review of the capital improvement projects or plan.
Yes, sir. This is a review of some of the CIP policies and the debt policy, which most of the debt policy applies to the CIP budget. The first slide is just a general discussion on the major types of debt and when these funds can be repurposed for other things. General obligation bonds, that they can be declared surplus when you have cost assurance and confirmation of adequate resources. to deliver specifically approved projects. I think we have a internally kind of look at around 85, substantially complete in this respect. Try to be pretty conservative there, and the surplus proceeds can be used for another purpose that is consistent with the purposes for which the debt was originally issued. And in the instance of GOs, you look at the voted proposition. You can't use savings in one proposition to cover project costs of another categorical type. In the example, park money can be used for street. If you have two propositions that have the same general purpose, then you can share the surplus between those propositions. And certificates of obligation, which we've issued some for facilities, much of the same criteria apply, except you don't have a voted proposition. You would look at the project list in the notice of intention to determine where you could use those funds. And in utility revenue bonds, technically they're sold for the combined utility system, but it has been our practice to assign by utility division. In other words, we don't use water for gas typically, and any surplus funds are used for other project in that respective division. Some of the charter says that regarding the capital improvement plan that we review and make that we give the program to the planning commission, and they review it and make recommendations to the city council. And then dropping down into the debt management policy. Now, this is as it currently exists. There's going to be changes made to this, and they'll be brought back to you in the next few months. 16.1 basically says that in order to assure sufficient cash flow, we'll have an annual debt issuance schedule. Now, we just created in the budget office a capital budget area in December. So we're trying to crank down in this area a lot more as to when we hold off as long as possible before we go out and sell bonds and have to pay interest on those bonds. So that's some of the discussion a couple of days ago. There's a lot of movement around the capital budget, and almost all of it is done to keep from having to go out and sell additional bonds. If we know a project was scheduled for May, and it's now determined that we're not going to get to that for various reasons, and we may go move money for that into a project that is. So there's a lot of movement of money to avoid having to go out and sell additional debt. Section 16.2 just says that the asset being financed has to have a life at least as long as the debt issued. 16.3 kind of defines what capital improvement projects qualify, that new capital assets or improvements to an existing asset that would increase the capacity or improve the functionality or extend the life beyond what it was originally set at. In Section 16.4.1 defines what asset they have to exceed 5,000 and what would be a capital project. This is more in the operating where you could capitalize something. It has to be at least 5,000 and have a useful life of a year. Of course, like I said before, if it's going to be funded with debt, it needs to be have a life at least as long as the financing payout. The next section, 16.4.2, states that the council goals and policies focused on infrastructure improvement, and that the city strives to maintain this infrastructure at a level to protect the city's investment. The next section goes into the budget process, that an annual review is done, projects are submitted. And a couple slides later, I'm going to show you going forward, how we're proposing to go through this process. And like I said, this policy is going to be updated here in the next few months. The current policy is decisions are made on prioritizing projects based on the following criteria: public health and safety, regulatory requirement, voter-approved bonds, the completion of existing projects, and the operational life cycle, and then any new projects recommended. Capital improvements may be funded using current revenues. either property tax, grant funds, contribution, and that the city staff will make every effort to utilize pay-as-you-go. That's where we transfer anything in excess in utility fund of the 25% to capital reserves and use that for pay-as-you-go. The next section deals with how the plan is presented to the Planning Commission, and that once it's approved, the projects and the dollar amount of the capital projects, any additions to the guide would warrant coming back to council and amending the plan. There's another slide on basically the process, but I want to go to an area that this is going forward. This is how we've already started this process. How the capital improvement program would be administered. We would request all departments to submit their CIP projects, they're working on them right now, and then they're submitted to the CIP, to the Capital Improvement Program Office for review and ranking, and then the CIP office reviews the packets they receive from the departments. First, they review them to make sure they comply with physical and related protocols, as well as their documentation is complete. The engineering department would review the projects and give an assessment of the validity. And if it's recognized as viable, then the project would be submitted to the assistant city manager for final review. The evaluation and ranking committee would consist of a finance representative, an engineering representative, a member from the executive administrative staff, and then also a representative from asset management. All the projects would be scored. And then the projects that were selected by their score and ranking, and then they're added to the CIP plan until the current CIP budget is met. And this is a list of the criteria that we're recommending that be used to score these projects with the points by each one.
Oh, good. I didn't get on that.
The risk to health, safety, and environment, including regulatory or mandated, would be 20 points. The asset condition and longevity of what's being replaced, 15 points. The community investment and economic prosperity, 15 points. Sustainability and conservation would be 20 points. And then the last three, funding availability, project readiness, and department support would each be 10 points apiece. And any projects that weren't funded, we've created a database, would go into that database. So we still have track of them for the following year. If they're brought back up, we have all the information. Would have to be updated, but we'd have all that information for the projects that didn't get into the CIP for the current year. I think that's all I have. We have a discussion on the.
All right. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. So, Mr. Houlihan, when you're talking about CIP, you're including both general fund and enterprise funds?
Yes.
Okay. And one quick, you have the $5,000 capital limitation, or not limitation, but bar on capitalized items. Isn't that a little bit?
Well, that's more to
that's
capitalize an item in an operating fund.
Yeah, like in the operating side.
Yeah.
I'm still thinking that's
pretty low.
Pretty low.
Even on the operating side?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
you know, the sidewalk we did. How many? If we were really following with that, we'd be capitalizing everything.
For the capital improvement plan for the actual CAP budget, the policy would be set at 50,000 minimum.
Okay.
The capitalization we're talking about is vehicles and equipment that finance does during the capital process.
Side. Sure. Yeah. That's still, you guys are the experts on that. But my big point here on your CIP, I think I'm really glad to see you coming with this scoring. But on our enterprise funds, this is an enterprise. It's a business. It ought to me, ROI should be the predominant. Is we're looking at these projects on there, what's our return? You know, we've got our water system, our wastewater system, you know, and there's no provision for that. personally, just 1 out of 9 think ROI ought to be at least half of our scoring on an enterprise fund, or even a solid waste. What's the value of that garbage truck on there? Are we going to save money? Are we going to be more efficient for the taxpayers? I can see on the general fund, your scoring on there fits that general fund criteria where health, safety, sustainability, those others come into play. But in the enterprise fund, I would like to see y'all take a look at your scoring on there and take a hard look at the financial ROIs on it. That's just 1 out of 9.
Okay. Mr. Hunter?
Thank you. Rebecca, this is actually a question for you. Online, when your presentation stops at 7, can we get the rest of the slides?
Actually, it's a question for staff. We don't, that's what's in the item. So I think
yes,
we can provide copies.
Slide will provide that, yes.
Yes,
Thank
please.
you.
If you can provide copies, we'd appreciate it.
Well, I'm glad it wasn't just me that thought I'd. I can go to 7 and we're up to number 10. I said, I didn't want to ask the question because maybe I lost it. I don't know. Thank you very much. Mr. Hernandez.
Yeah, can you go back a few slides where it describes what is a capital improvement project?
In the debt policy? 16.3 there, or you took it as something else?
Is it that one?
Or was it the 16.41 that talked about the 5,000?
Right. And I have to agree with Councilman Smith on this. It seems really, really low. You said it was 50,000?
For CIP projects that will be included in the capital budget would be $50,000.
Okay, so that's a dollar amount particular, but what about specifics into what constitutes a capital project? Land,
so that
structure, machinery, equipment, longevity of for example, like useful life. I don't want to put something on CIP projects that.
Well, the life has to be at least as long as the debt.
Right.
The useful life would need to be at least as long as the debt. Let's see, I think it's stated that. (16.2) states that. We need to be updating this policy here in the next few months.
Right. If we can make that clearer as to what it actually is, definitions in terms of what a capital project is and what the requirements are to be qualified for the CIP, that would be to provide some clarity on that. I just want to make sure that that's in there. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Garza?
Yeah, I agree that $5,000 is a little bit much, and that should be absorbed by someone's operating budget if there's something they got to fix their expenditure. And then even the 1 year, I know that probably your gap principles say that it should be somewhere in the area, minimum 3 to 5. I'm not sure where the 1 year comes from. But
you're absolutely correct. So for the 5,000, this is a little bit pulled out because of the debt policy. 5,000 applies to, as I said, vehicles, machinery, equipment, things like that, what we do on the operating side.
Operating side, for capital asset, not necessarily capital project.
So we're going to make that separation there where, what my division will be doing is the capital budgeting, the actual projects, the construction, new to, either rebuild something, build new roads, that would be my side on the capital budget side. The capitalization of vehicles, equipment, things like that, that's where really that policy applies to, is the 5,000 and minimum of a year life expectancy to capitalize it for CAFR.
Okay, just concerned that maybe if we're going through all that issue of depreciating and everything else, you don't have the same benefits of depreciation expense that businesses do. So I just think that you're probably going through, for smaller dollar items, you're probably going through more exercise than you need to go through. The other thing is, this is just a thought process. And again, I'm not suggesting that we can go out there and build a new police station or something like that, but we just went to the voters and asked for $20 million in order to improve some of our facilities. And My concern is that we don't, it is my feeling that we're not doing an analysis of our assets related to facilities and determine what their condition is, what the costs are, how energy efficient they are, what kind of, whether they fully satisfy the need. And so that at some point, you got capital projects based on the availability of funding. And I think that we should be able to put together a wish list in terms of facilities so that as some debt falls off, whether it be 5, 7, 8 years, 10 years from now, that you've got some wish projects that you say, hey, all things being equal, if we wanted to be state of the art in terms, because I know, like for instance, I know the police station particularly, and then the municipal court there, and the jail, our detention facility, apart from there, doesn't lend itself to the most efficient manner of operating possible. And so again, I just think that at some point we need to be able to have an analysis of our assets in terms of facilities so that we don't take part of that $20 million and spend $1 million here on this building if we're thinking it's going to rise to the top when some of that debt falls off, and we spend $4 or $5 million on a chiller or whatever it is, that we might need to do, but we might not want to do if we're going to go down a different track, and that's just my comments. Figure out if we can figure out something that we might be able to get some feasibility, or future council might be able to look at.
Yeah, so we're going to try to build a database of projects, so to address the needs. So we're building an access database, and the request for projects to departments was submit your projects. We want to see all the different projects that you might have in the pipeline going out 10 years. They might not be able to be fitted in this year's or next year's, but we want a database of every project so we can analyze it. So even if it doesn't get funding this year, it's still in the database and it's considered the following year, until we can find, like you said, if there's some remaining funding and if the scoring is correct, we can slide that project in and get it completed.
Or if some of the debt falls off.
Exactly. Yes. So we're going to be creating a database that will have as many projects as the departments will be able to provide us.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Ouellette?
No, sir.
All right. Well, we appreciate that. The one we implemented the beginning of the budget cycle, and I'm sure probably in the accounting thing, but just a reminder, because they'll be looking, particularly Port Industries and our industrial people, on that fund, that additional fund for future water supply. You've got a separate line item for that account, right?
It's a completely separate fund.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Well, they'll be wanting to kind of, and we will too, kind of be seeing where we are on that, so we can kind of project.
Actually, it's going to appear on your this coming quarters. Okay. You will see Fund 4022, which is called Drought Surcharge, and it accounts for the revenues in there, and you will see the fund balance basically growing because we have no expenditures at this time budgeted for that. Great. But it's separated.
All right. And then remind the council, we got a special council meeting on Tuesday. Did we say 9 o'clock?
On April 2nd at 9.
Who threw out 9? You don't want 10? No, I guess 9 o'clock.
You suggested 9.
9 o'clock. I know I had a moment of weakness there. But
Mr. Mayor.
9 o'clock for the continued discussion on the city manager process. And there was something, the information we need to get to Miles that we, by tomorrow we tell we'd get him the information that we needed to him, so remind you of that. Anything else for the good of the organization, Mr. Manager?
Nothing, Mayor. Thank y'all.
All right. Any other public comment? If not, the workshop is adjourned.